Bryan Fischer here with D1 Ticker and D1 Extra. Happy to have another edition of AD Search Insights here presented by Athliance, and happy to welcome in Paul Oren, who covers Valpro Athletics for the Victory Bell. And Paul, it's been 18 years, but Mark LaBarbera has decided to retire. I'm curious, why now, and how do you kind of sum up his tenure there in Valpo?
Yeah, I think Mark was looking to retire. He's getting to that age. I don't want to say how old he is because but I think Mark was looking to step aside, and I think the university, from what I understand, offered some retirement buyout packages for different people, like across the board, really, like professors, staff, faculty, administrators, all that stuff. And as Mark told me when I sat down with him a couple weeks ago. It was an offer that he couldn't pass up. I think he was getting ready to retire, and he said, "Let's do it now." And he's done a lot. He's accomplished a lot, and I think now is a good time for him to kind of step away.
I mean, he's obviously led a realignment transition twice now for the university, from the Summit League to the Horizon to the Missouri Valley. I know you're at Arch Madness recently. I'm curious, how would you kind of sum up how that has gone and how he's been able to provide some leadership through those moves?
Yeah, I think when Mark showed up in 2004, I think there was an idea of, okay, where can Valpo get to? And I think all schools, mid-majors, are looking to that. Where can the school get to? We've seen the Butlers of the world, the Loyolas of the world, the Valpos of the world move up. And so I think that was top of mind. Valpo at that time had been kind of running through the then Mid-Continent Conference. And it was a tough conference to be in. It was geographically spaced out everywhere. Valpo would be traveling to southern Utah, to Oral Roberts, to Kansas City, to Shreveport, Louisiana. And I think when you're looking at when Mark came in, I think he looked at, wait a minute, the competition is good, but what's the toll it's taking on the student athletes and the travel and all of that? And he wanted to be a little bit more centrally located in the footprint. And that's where the Horizon League, a conference that Valpo had tried to get into maybe a decade earlier when a bunch of schools left the Mid-Con to go, and the Midwestern Collegiate Conference kind of became the Horizon League. Valpo got left at the altar, more or less. And so they got a chance to get back into it, and Mark led that, along with a lot of other things that he was doing. It took a couple of years for Valpo to get settled in the Horizon League, and then they found their groove, especially in men's basketball, which is the premier sport for Valpo. And they started competing really well and winning conference championships. And then the Missouri Valley Conference, which had just lost Creighton and then Wichita State, they came calling right around the time that another school that they had taken from the Horizon League, Loyola, really started to do well. And so Valpo then transitioned into the Valley, and it's been tough. I mean, that is a guillotine of a league, if I can say, and not just in basketball, across the board. And I think it's been harder for Valpo to transition into the Valley, despite the fact they did make the conference tournament championship game a couple of years ago. But it's the challenge, right? Mark LaBarbera got Valpo to the Valley. Now it's going to be the challenge for the next AD to get Valpo to the top of the Valley.
And if Mark's tenure is obviously concluding now, one of the big things that he's gone out with last year was certainly the rebranding from Crusaders to Beacons. How has that gone? And I know there was some folks that were probably a little upset that the university kind of went through this process, but others are probably happy with the name change. How has everything gone from a marketing and standpoint, and with that transition being led by Mark now?
Well, I think that's first of all, it's a great question. Second of all, Mark would tell you it's a bit of a misnomer. He was very clear in saying, look, it is not the athletics department's responsibility to come up with what the nickname is of the school. That is from higher above him. And that's something that he had kind of said all along. Now, Mark was on the committee along with a couple other people, some students, some student athletes, some faculty, and all that helped get down to a list of 8 names. But it was the president of the university, the new president, Jose Padilla, who chose that name. And it was not Mark LaBarbera who stepped forward and said, I want to change the name. And it was not Mark LaBarbera who stepped forward and said, I want Beacons to be the name. He basically, what he said was all along was that, look, it's the university and the university's community responsibility to choose what the nickname is. It's athletics' responsibility to take that nickname and go forward with it. And so I think, again, Mark has been a good soldier, so to speak, in terms of saying, okay, you went from Crusaders to Beacons, let's go. And but he was not the one that made the decision. He's certainly not the one leading the transition to it or anything like that. And I do, but Bryan, it's a great question, because I do think 99.9% of the people out there attribute this to him, and he had very little to do with it.
You mentioned the new president there, Jose Padilla. I mean, somebody who has been in the job for a while, but still fairly new to the university itself. Seems to be a bit of a sports fan. He's at a lot of university events. What kind of person do you think he's ultimately looking to hire, and what are kind of his aspirations for the athletics program in general?
Well, first of all, he's absolutely a sports fan. He's got a dog named Coach. And so he's got a background in lacrosse. He went to University of Michigan Law School, where he told me going to football games on Saturday was like going to church on Sunday. And so he's certainly someone who understands athletics and understands that athletics can be the doorstep to the university. I've had a chance to talk to him a couple different times, and he's basically said, look, we don't want to be anyone's doormat, is what he said about Valpo. And he's basically said, look, it's a small school that punches above its weight. That's kind of his tagline, right? A small but mighty university that punches above its weight. And I think he realizes that he's going to have to make things work with maybe, I mean, I just saw today, Illinois State just hired a new basketball coach and a 5-year, $550,000 deal with a country club membership and a lot of other stuff there. There's a lot of bells and whistles that the big state schools have that the small private schools don't have. And so I think when Jose Padilla looks at who he wants to bring in, he wants to bring in someone who's competed in Division I athletics. That's one thing. Someone who understands what it's like to step onto the court or the field or the pool or wherever and compete. He also wants somebody, too, who has experience as an administrator in high-level college athletics, Division I athletics, right? Whether that means a high major, mid major, low major, whatever. He wants someone who's got administrative experience. I think what he's looking for there is somebody who gets it, who understands what the student athletes are going for, but also might understand the challenges and what might work at other schools. I think he'll probably go fundraiser route. Like, I think he'll probably look for a business-minded individual to come in, and because that's what Valpo needs, right? They need, I mean, I don't want to sound cliche, but they need money. I mean, who doesn't right now? But, they've got facility upgrades they have to make. Bryan, they have facility upgrades they have to make in order to be competitive in the Horizon League, which they're no longer in anymore. Now they certainly need facility upgrades to be competitive in the Missouri Valley Conference. It's night and day compared to what a lot of the other schools have.
Okay, we'll get to that to-do list in just a second, but what are some potential names that maybe you've heard or you think could get involved with this search? Obviously, it is still early in the process, but you mentioned that D1 background. I mean, that's going to narrow the field just a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know they've enlisted the help of Parker Executive Search, which is one of the premier college athletics search firms that's out there. I always go back and forth. Like, do you need, if you know your AD is going to leave, doesn't everybody have a list, right? Well, they didn't fire Mark, so that, I mean, maybe it wasn't expected, but he was getting close to retirement age. You've got a new president, so it makes sense that, I mean, if it was a president who'd been here for 15 years, well, then you probably have a list, right? Everyone's got a list in their desk of who the next 5 people are. And maybe that list wasn't formulated yet. So you bring in Parker Executive Search and you vet everybody and you find people. I came up with on the Victory Bell, I wrote a list of 5 potential hires that had connections to Valpo. And I looked at a couple different administrators that have worked at Valpo or coached at Valpo or played at Valpo that are across the board. Mike Avery, the former men's soccer coach, has been an athletic director and is now the coach of a professional soccer team in Fort Wayne. He's just an excellent guy. Jen Samble was the SWA at Valpo. She now works for the NCAA. She was a 2-sport athlete in college. Just a phenomenal woman, a great administrator. Phil Willey played basketball at Valpo. He had then went to University of Wyoming, where he worked for a long time in compliance and then general counsel. And so he understands the administrative things. He has since taken a job at Deloitte Consulting for higher ed, doing a lot of stuff there. Stephen Anthony is another name who was a women's soccer coach at Valpo, and then he started the bowling program at Valpo and helped lay the groundwork for being the #1 ranked team in the country about a decade ago. He went into administration, a lot of the business aspect of things. Then he went on to Michigan State, and he was doing that for a long time. Had spent a couple of about 4 or 5 years at Michigan State, and now he's the athletic director of a prominent high school in South Bend. That would be another name to look at. But again, if we're looking away from away from Valpo, I looked at who does Jose Padilla know, and he worked at DePaul, and they've got a guy named Thad Dorn, and I think I'm pronouncing his last name correctly, who is essentially the money guy at DePaul. This is a guy, and that school, their men's basketball program has not been great, but they have generated a lot of interest with their Wintrust Arena, which is a top of the line facility that they have there. And Thad was involved in all of that. He's someone who played baseball at Iowa State, I believe, and he's been an administrator there. And I'm just reading the tea leaves, right? Like, you're going to make this move, you're going to bring somebody new in. You want to surround yourself with people you know. Or you bring in Parker Executive who says, hey, here are a bunch of people that you might not know, but we're going to vet them for you. So my money right now is probably on this guy from DePaul, although that's just me having a gut instinct, right? And I don't know anything other than that. And they've said that they're going to bring in people over the next 2 months or so, and I imagine they're going to want to make a decision by June.
So you mentioned there, it's obviously March. We're coming up on the men's basketball tournament, and obviously, and anytime you mention Valpo and around March, there's some instant connections there. They've struggled a bit, certainly in the Missouri Valley since that transition. I mean, is that kind of the top at the top of the to-do list for whoever comes in there as the new AD is to kind of fix men's basketball, and then everything else will kind of fall in place?
Yeah, I mean, I would absolutely think so. It's interesting because you look at like what's wrong with Valpo basketball. I don't really know that wrong is the word. They have had buzzard's luck for 5 years now, right? I mean, just nonstop. I mean, this year it was injuries. They brought in all these Big Ten transfers. And really it wasn't until the last couple weeks of the year that you really felt like they had a chance to really gel properly as a team. They looked really good in their first game in Arch Madness, albeit against the last place Evansville Purple Aces. And then in the second round, the quarterfinals against Missouri State, they did everything they wanted to do defensively. They just went 4 of 24 from the 3-point line. And so, people criticize the coaching staff. Well, the coaches didn't miss 23-pointers in the game. They had everything set up probably. They just missed shots. And but it's been a steady stream of just tough breaks, whether it been, they made the championship game a couple of years ago and looked like they were going to bring the bulk of that team back. And then their star player, COVID hits, their star player goes home for, 2 or 3 months because of COVID. And people back home get in his ear and he ends up transferring to DePaul. So, and he went back home, and I'm not going to discredit a kid for having a chance to go play for a team in the city, but it's been a lot of bad luck for the coaching staff and for the program. And, they're up against it, right? I mean, I think, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but if we looked at the budgets of every team in the Valley, Valpo's got to be toward the bottom. You look at recruiting budgets, you look at all that stuff. It's got to be toward it's like pushing a boulder up a mountain. And in some ways, I think Valpo ought to be commended for some of the things they've been able to accomplish. But you're right, Bryan, that is first and foremost. You've got to get men's basketball back to the top of the league, the top half of the league. You do that, everything else falls into place.
I mean, what kind of job is this just in general? Even kind of taking that basketball component out. Obviously, you can get to places like Chicago and Indianapolis pretty easy in terms of your livability and your life there at the university. But you do have a new president, a lot to do on that to-do list. But I mean, how would you kind of sum up what this job is and what it possibly can be?
You're talking about the athletic director job. Yeah. I mean, well, first of all, one of the things, and you said it, Bryan, like when you talk about Valpo, it's synonymous with the shot and the Sweet 16 run and all of that. That is a blessing. And in a way, and I almost hate to use the word curse, but like the Drew family was Valpo for such a long time. Homer Drew, Bryce Drew, Scott Drew, and their success has been great. And they're people that they've done a lot for me in my life and all that. But like at a certain point, schools end up moving away from people, or people move away from schools. And I think one of the things that's hamstrung Valpo a little bit has been a lot of this talk in the last couple of years of like, well, is a Drew going to come back? First of all, Homer Drew, love the man to death, is not going to be the athletic director at Valpo, despite the fact people have asked me if that was going to happen. So I think it becomes, how do you reestablish a new path forward for a school while paying attention to the history of where Valpo came from? And so, we mentioned basketball. One of the other things that's big at Valpo to a degree is football. Not necessarily big from wins and losses in terms of a competitive standpoint, because again, they are pushing multiple boulders up a hill trying to be successful. But the alumni base for football is very passionate. And so the athletic director will come in, and whoever that might be, and they'll pay attention to basketball. They've got to pay attention to their football alums. They've got to pay attention to the alumni network in general. And they also have to figure out, what does Valpo want to be? Like they're in the Valley, right? It's great opportunity there. How are they going to be competitive in things? A big decision that was made, Bryan, a couple of years ago was when Valpo, not well received by many, cut men's soccer and men's tennis. And part of the reason they did that was because they said, look, in order for us to be competitive across the board, we've got to be able to fund experiences and opportunities for everybody. And having 19, I think it was maybe 19 or 21 at that point, Division I sports that they were supporting, when you count indoor and outdoor track as two different ones, that was more than anybody else in the Valley. And, I think Murray State's coming in, they don't have that many sports that they have to support. So they support basketball in an amazing way. And so I think trying to figure out, where can you excel? What can you do? And then giving your coaches. And one of the things that I know that the president's looking at is how not only the head coaches, but how do you support the assistant coaches? So that'll be something. So fundraising is going to be huge. I mean, a long answer. The short answer is fundraising. You ask what kind of person they're going to bring in, someone who can get people excited and say, look, we need your support, get that support. And then if the support turns into wins, then it'll just be a circle, wins, money, wins, money, wins. And that'll just build and build and build.
Well, as they say, it's often, can you find somebody who touches money? And I think it sounds like certainly Valpo is going to be doing that. Terrific stuff. Thanks for joining us, Paul.
Hey, my pleasure.